mean, for instance, if it's mission data, you worry about its integrity and maybe the provenance or something. If
Well, you probably it's probably confidentiality problem too. So
right.
And I sent a note today.
But then if it's like a security configuration data, then you have another set of requirements.
Yes, because it's going to be a high level
on.
of confidentiality. Now, one may be confidentiality within the system, but not encrypted throughout the system. Whereas you start to security stuff, passwords and things like that, those things need to be, protected. Clear text even in memory is not good anymore.
So let me ask you, most static analysis tools can't distinguish whether it's critical data or not critical data.
That's correct.
Okay.
But in the model, you
can
capture.
Well, but here's the question. What a static analysis tool can tell you is we checked for this violation. We found 20 places where you might have had the violation, but in none of them was the structure such that it violated good practice. Therefore, you're clear. That's what most static analysis tools will tell you.
That's right.
We looked for the presence of this in places, in structures where it exists, and we found no structure that violated, that was a violation of a CWE. So yes, that's what we can tell now.
In this world, the absence is the problem in most cases.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the summary of my analysis and what my note says. It categorizes stuff into like 5 different areas, and there's probably more of them. And that, with SysML 2.0, we probably need to talk to them and see if there's some kind of way that we can, do either an extension to the language in the future or something like that. I don't know what the right way is to approach this. And I finally broke down, and I'm taking all the study guides on SysML now. So I'm going to know what is possible.
So what are we saying? In the model, you would express which data is sensitive and needs to be protected. Is that what we're saying? So that
That's
we know
correct.
if you have a violation there, it's a problem. But if you have a violation over here where we don't have that designation, it's not a problem.
That's correct. It's certain levels, and I'm thinking that those are assurance case. And what will happen is if you don't have the assurance case associated with that, that's the problem. The problem is you haven't got the right assurance, the assurance case for it. Whether you did the insurance case correctly or not is a different issue. That I don't think we can test for in the model, but and maybe we can if we have the right kind of extensions. But it's almost like that there's got to be some additional meta model extensions or something like that, extensions to SysML 2.0 that we're going to have to think about here. Now, Bob, I don't know if you agree with a thing that I said, but
no, I mean, the bottom line is we're back to, is the model capturing, the system description at a level that we can detect the weakness or not. So, your discussion about SysML, if SysML can't let a modeler denote, the information flows and the control paths and so on, then nobody's model would be, able to represent it.
All of those things are enumeratable through a block diagram and a type of element today, I think, in SysML 1.6. Okay? But I think 2.0 actually adds some, with the expansion of the language, will add some new, descriptions out there that could be very valuable to identifying things that are security oriented. And I think the time has come that you've got to, at a model level, you got to say, you got to identify the CIA for any data element.
Right, and I would expect that any, security view on an information flow in a model would have that, right?
That's right.
It would have kind of the attack surface, what are the, privileged data and where does it move between, and so I don't think it's.
Well, once you have the data element associated with it, the movement between interfaces and stuff like that is all known, right?
Yep.
So Bob, let me ask you, if we wanted to create a measure, right, and we've detected all these violations, some of them are on critical data, some of them are not. Would we use CWSS to distinguish that and create the measure?
Possibly.
But
I'd
yeah,
have
I
to-
think
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I still, sorry for that. I still think we are confusing the two aspects. Yeah, if I understand Paul correctly, that we need a model to capture security information, and that would be the violations for the model. If the information is missing, the model is not good. Then this information can be used later for SAST solutions, but that's kind of the regular or the traditional CISC stuff. Here, the violation would be, the model violation would be the absence of information. It will not be about categorizing as a violation in the implementation. It won't, it's not possible. So it's kind of from the first meetings we had some there were some discussion about some simple model quality, such as yeah, you must have names, you must have this and that. So basically it's really the feature of the model that we were assessing with this new standard. And here it's not just having short names, descriptions, or whatever. It's also about capturing information that can be used later, but here it's not about the use later, it's about the presence of this information in the model. And if the model lacks, for instance, the identification of critical data, that's a violation. So it's not a CWSS scoring, it's
right. So there's,
that's where I was going.
There's can the model, does the model have the right features that I could actually analyze it so I could tell you something about the real system it's modeling?
Well, didn't we said there were two measures we were interested in? One was a measure of the quality of the system as best we could analyze it at the model-based level.
Well, and
the second
I
was
would
the
almost,
quality of the model itself as a model.
so I would almost not use the word quality there. It's almost a, kind of feature completeness, or something like that. It's if it doesn't have certain things, you can't.
Full measure of model integrity is what it is. It's in other words, if you got missing elements, and it's oh, you're missing this stuff and that stuff and the other stuff, right? And it knows based on what your template is what you're missing.
Okay. What are these CWEs detectable at a model level, or is it the absence of information related to the CWEs that's what we're detecting?
That's correct. The latter.
the latter.
Yeah. Okay.
And then if the model has those features, I believe we could start analyzing that modeled thing for, you know, where this, you know, for other architectural issues.
Yeah. But if the model does not contain the information, then it's too late afterwards. We miss the information and all the answers are, oh, it depends, or it was intended, or something. If it's in the model, we know if it was intended.
Right, and in an example here, what you just said, Bob, is you have a data element that was given a certain integrity and confidentiality level, and all of a sudden it goes out to an external interface, right? If that's not marked as a trusted external interface at that level, guess what? That is a violation.
Yep. And if you've got a sensitive process and you have external input that goes directly to it without being, you know, vetted for correctness, then that would be also.
That's right. In other words, there's a trust level that has to be achieved in a validation routine. You define what trust level is required, and from that point forward, every downstream element can presume that the trust level has been achieved, right? If it hasn't been, if the code's bad, that's one thing, right? But the bottom line is the model said it had to be that trust level, right?
So what we need to do then is define the information or characteristics we expect to see for each of the CWEs that are in the model, that are in the measure.
Right, and I think that's where Paul was going.
That's exactly where I was going.
Right, so he went through all these CWEs and said, well, what kind of thing are they looking for? And now can we go see if the model has that kind of thing?
Yeah.
So this is why a lot of my responses there say maybe, and some of the ones I say are out because there's no way. Well, it may be that, yeah, you could do them, but you'd have to have the information, right? But a large majority of the things depend on having model structure in place where it's been enumerated down to a level where you have the information and you turn the switch on to be looking for that enumerated information, and it says, oh, yeah, this data element has got an association with it. If there's no association with that data element, the values for the security for it, that's a violation, right? In the model, at the quality level of the model, okay? Once those are enumerated, the question is, well, okay, did you do it far enough? Did you do the right thing? The trust levels and those kinds of things. And so I think this is actually worth a conversation with some of the vendors out there to say, what would we need to have this? And some of our very knowledgeable SysML experts, because SysML 2.0 may need some extensions to it, or it may be some language inclusions, because they're about 3 months away from publishing their draft. That doesn't mean we can't add things after the draft.
Hey guys,
Go ahead.
I want to do an analogy because I still think I'm a little confused. So there's a whole bunch of CWEs about memory buffers. We developed programming languages that basically took that ability out of the programming text. You can't actually have that CWE in this language. Isn't that what you're describing? That model doesn't have that element. It won't ever have that element. It's already modeled to protect the modeler from making that mistake, like a string buffer overflow.
Right. So let me see if I can.
If you use the template, yes.
So when you build a model, it can capture, just the performance, relevant attributes of a system. And you don't care about, you don't model information flow. You don't model, different levels of privilege and, security. So the model is very simple, and it's just trying to see about speed or, amount of memory or amount of disk space. So if a model doesn't have in it the kinds of information about a real system that would let you analyze the architecture of that system, then we can't do the analysis. So our first bucket of things is, what does somebody have to have included in a model in order to do a security analysis of the thing that's being modeled? So that's that first measure. Once you actually have a real model that really captures the things that would let you analyze the architecture for security weaknesses, then you could tell whether these different CWEs were there or not. But we don't even know if the model has enough richness, to reveal that. So it's not quite analogous to what you were talking about, where, if you use this language, you won't have a C, pointer error, right? Because there's no such thing as a pointer in that other language.
Right. The way you just described was the same kind of concept, right? I wrote a simple hello world program. It doesn't have a SQL injection problem because it doesn't have a database connector.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's incomplete. It's a simple program. I mean, because the model doesn't have it is not a weakness.
No, I don't think we were saying the model doesn't have it. If the modeling tool can't capture that kind of detail, then you can't do the analysis.
And the reality is, a model can capture anything you want, okay? The deal is, to what degree or effort do you want to enumerate that model to get the data in there? And the SysML 2.0, we may be able to make this a hell of a lot easier, is my point. That's because they're going up, and make it more intuitive, other than just blocks and elements and parts and things like that.
Yeah, because they're getting driven by people, worried about privacy, GDPR, and, proprietary data. They're not thinking from a traditional government security point of view. They're just thinking business exposure, but it's driving them to the same place.
That's right, and I think we can ride on that.
And to rebound on GDPR, that's one of what we saw, is that we analyzed a lot of software and to help companies meet GDPR requirements. And then what we saw is that they don't have any clue about their data and if it's sensitive or not. So we kind of had to help them. Okay, that's what we have. That's all the data elements you have. And now you have to match it to the sensitivity, because it was nowhere to be found. So for GDPR and ensuring that data is accessed and processed the right way, it was completely missing from their model. So I would rate their model as bad. And then, of course, the implementation cannot be good if you don't even know what you are supposed to do. So here's a model. For me, a good model should contain at least GDPR-like data. And to take your Hello World example without the database, it's not a problem, because if you don't have any data element, then you are not missing the sensitivity tag or information. It's not there. But if you have a database and if you have data elements, then you must have sensitivity. That's kind of the check for the model.
Yeah, I feel like that sample makes sense because you ran a check on the model. Does it have this thing? Yes. Is it using it correctly? Yes. Not it's missing. You know, like I just think of the way we normally analyze code. It should be the same type of thing. I can only check I found these things. Are they used well? If the thing is missing, I don't know if it's actually a problem or not. I can only say it's missing.
Yeah, for instance, another
to the missing rule. Every data element should be enumerated as to what its CIA is. Okay.
That makes sense because you found a data element. It should have the attribute XYZ. But if you
Right.
don't find a data element,
I don't
you
care.
cannot say it's not
It's not
done
an
right.
issue. There's no data elements in there, then the model has no data associated with it. Then you go back and look at the system and say, okay, has it got interfaces or not? Is it data? You know, it's a whole different level of analysis that occurs that, right? And I would argue that, at least for government-based models, when we start getting the functional requirements, and we'll probably get what the inputs and the outputs, the EOs, the EIs, and you know, and all that are in the model, the functional model that we get from the government as our requirements, because that's where they're going, at least in the defense side. And I usually, you know, I'm thinking that's going to happen. I'm starting to see it in the intelligence community as well, and it's just a matter of time before, you know, all of these non-digital ways of doing documentation are going to go away, and they're going to want everything in a digital model, because now they can look at it real simple and do the analytic against that model. When you change it, you can do the analytic to say, well, what happened to the time elements, the security elements, the resource requirement elements of that. And so the richness of how fast you can do things just goes through the roof in speed.
Yeah, no, describing something as a model, as code is light years ahead of paper, pen.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I'm not.
And you'll see what will happen is there are going to be people working across, you know, in various areas, and these models are going to be actually loaded in some big, you know, server. It's got, you know, 50 gigs of memory in it, just associated with this model, and people are going to be able to see how the model is being affected by 5 or 8 people working against that model simultaneously. That's where it's going.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. Pretty sure you already have that in the physical CAD world with cars and planes and ships.
Well, I can tell you Jazz does it already, and part of the Cameo suite does it already, and I believe part of the PT suite, C-suite can do it. And those are, you know, the 3 big ones. The days of desktop modeling tool where you're just doing diagrams in SysML going away. You're going to actually be able to see a system real time being built.
And I would say, even if not for critical embedded systems and for defense and the likes, what we see with microservices is kind of the same. We have to be able to find I would say information about security, because when you expose something via an API, if you don't specify what you need to secure, is authentication required, authorization, and so on, or I would say all the things you have to do, we would expect from a model to say it's explicitly bypassed, or it's explicitly using this service of authentication, and so on, and then we can check afterwards the implementation. But I would say here's a model. For instance, if you are using the Netflix API for your microservices, then perhaps you don't want someone using something different for authentication or for authorization and so on and so on. So you must be able to capture this kind of information there so that you can then check against the reality. But we need to capture it first, otherwise there are so many different possibilities. You can't say it's bad, you just say it depends. So the dream would be to capture much more about what is intended so that then we can really check what has been done. So microservices is also a good is a field for that, yeah, too.
Yeah, I'm not saying we don't want to check. I'm saying it's hard to check that something's missing versus an attribute of something's missing, a validation of something's missing, right? Again, I go back to a string, right? If I can go find all the strings in the model, I can now check a bunch of attributes, features, functions of those data elements. But if the model has no strings, maybe it's a calculator program and everything's a number, you know? And, you know, like it makes sense that you can't put an insensitive or unsecured data element in the right place, but you got to find the data element and then check the sensitivity level. So the violation is there's no level, not that the level's wrong. That's what I find interesting about what we're discussing.
That's correct. The point is it's missing, and guess what? If you didn't enumerate that, that's a problem.
One day we may come up with solutions to say if the level is wrong, but so far let's start with at least put something.
And this is exactly all the conversations, at least that I've had with my counterparts and the government. The issue is that, you know, modeling didn't add a lot of value until they needed to build things a lot faster and the systems got so darn complex, right? And then the cyber problem hit them, right? And now they have nothing digitized because everybody said, well, modeling is just too expensive and we're not going to do it. We just need to build it, right? Now they're saying, oh crap, every time we change something, it's a mess because we don't have any idea what the effect is on the system. And then it came into the technology, underlying technology is changing so daggone fast, and the electronics and everything, the same problems happening there. And they're going like, look, we're done with doing anything on paper anymore. That is like caveman stuff. Because, you know, in early days of modeling, that was just a way to diagram stuff, digitize it in a tool instead of doing it on paper. That was it. There were no analytics. It's all the analytics that you get to against the model is where all the value comes from. Because you know whether the system's going to work or not before you start to build it, or you modify it. I don't know how aware y'all are of how a descriptive model, when you put it together, when you're putting that descriptive model together, you have to enumerate a bunch of information associated with a part in the model so that the analytic tool, whether it be, you know, a thermodynamic tool or a stress tool or whatever, you have to enumerate the elements about in the model and it's a special text format for that stuff. So that modelers are already doing that stuff today. They just need to do it for the security.
Are you saying, Paul, this is Mike, are you saying that these property on every object within a descriptive model could have an entry in there for data protection?
What I would say is every time it changes, it has to be there, or it's the first time, when it enters the system or when it's exiting the system. Because it should be inheritance. It should be inheritance if you're using that element throughout the system, right?
Okay. Because I'm thinking
Right.
statically, we don't have data in there. It's just the containers. And then when we go to execute it, now you can inherit the properties of the data at each of the objects and move forward. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Unless you change, in other words, if it needs to become encrypted because the data enters some, consolidated level that now raises it to a higher security level because you put 3 or 4 things together, and now it must be encrypted by law or by DOD, classification level or whatever, right? Then it becomes encrypted from that point forward, right? And it has to have a certain level of encryption routine, of encryption that was also stated that it has. Okay, yeah, we're using AES 256, or no, it has to be, type 1 elliptical encryption, right?
Correct.
Right, and so then,
but you said something very important there, because is the model supposed to carry the business rules for aggregation of data?
I say in security it does. That is, those business rules are functional requirements. Because that tells you when the data is a certain state, the functional requirement is what is its protection.
I agree with you. I'm just trying to think of who the subject matter expert is that's going to give us those business rules.
Well, I think you're going to
just simple GDPR, right? I mean, we've run through an entire regular data model, and we went to every single column in the database, and you labeled it, is this a GDPR field, yes or no? I mean, Paul's talking the same way. He's just talking, what's the sensitivity of the field? Instead of the field type, field length, field name, you need to know the sensitivity level of every field.
Well, I agree with that, but I'm also saying, did you also look at, if you combine columns 1, 3, and 7, you now have a different sensitivity on that data than what's the sensitivity on the individual columns.
And you could look at it from the aspect of, it could be 3 columns, it could be 3 external interfaces that brought you the data together.
Yep.
It's what it becomes, what is the data, the target data element, does it have a different level of inheritance than where it came from? Normally it just inherit, but if you actually define it, then it is now a new level, and that came from the functional requirement. There was a functional requirement block there that said what that requirement was when those 3 elements were put together. And you're going to be looking for a new CIA associated with that. And I'm using CIA just as a term because that's a common term. I'm not saying that's the right thing. It may be more elements associated with the data, okay? Because you got, in the classification world, you got all this stuff that, no foreign, all those things too.
Right.
Oh, by the way, how many of y'all are, deeply familiar with what's happening with the CMMC? You do realize in the DOD, all unclassified information is going to be CUI, okay? Controlled unclassified information.
Well, now, Paul, that's a little over. There's some information that's sensitive but unclassified that will be deemed CUI. It's not all unclassified data.
Mike, well, I can tell you that right now, our interpretation is every piece of data will have to be marked, okay? So you will have to actually mark it as open paren U, closed paren if it is unclassified, and if it's CUI, I think it's going to be CUI in there. open paren, CUI, close paren.
Right. And
so every piece of data in a DoD system, everything will be marked in the future in DoD.
that is true. And if it's CUI, it needs to be handled differently than if it's not.
Correct. Correct. And my whole point is in the model, there's
Yeah,
not
no,
going to be
you're right.
noise.
From a modeling
Everything's
point
going to
of
be
view,
marked.
yeah,
Now,
from
you
a
may
modeling
come
point
in,
of
it's
view,
unclassified.
this is something you're going to need to manage going forward.
Exactly. So I don't think until I saw all of that stuff and then I realized my insistence about models having this stuff, you know, in it for model-based system engineering, for, you know, having CWE linkages and things like that. I didn't realize how important it was going to be to solving some of the big problems we're going to have with data management and it's, you know, tagging it throughout a system. It's only hitting DoD right now, but we know what happens.
Yeah, no, I've done that at most organizations in the commercial world, but we were doing it at the document level for that same argument, right? What can I bring to a lawsuit? What can be public? What can't be public? What
That's
can be
right.
shown to a customer? You also got all the retention requirements. You're just going from a large thing like a document or a case file down to a small thing, a string, a date.
Same
But
rules, same
piece of
kind of
information.
rules.
That piece of information should have all of those attributes, right? Length, size, name, security, retention, etc.
Yeah, there's a little agency up there north of Washington that has to do that for everything they got.
Yeah, there's some large commercial companies that make lots of money that are doing it proactively. It's not about security, it's about cost efficiency and throughput. So trust me, Amazon has a lot of things on every little piece of data. It's data on data on data on data. Not unheard of.
Oh, yeah. So, Bill, we are 15 minutes into this call. And while I think it could be valuable to go through the spreadsheet, I'm not sure sitting here going one by one through these things and deciding whether you agree or disagree with what I wrote in there is a valuable use of everyone's time.
I still like to go through 2 or 3 examples. You know, maybe.
I'm all for that. I just was putting that on the table. I just because I think we've had a great conversation here so far. And Lamont, I don't think you have said anything yet. Do you have any comment?
No, I don't have any comments. I'm just kind of following along with everyone.
Did we lose Bill?
No, I just had my headset on mute. Or other Bill.
Oh,
Yeah, Bill Richards, Bill Nichols, rather.
Yeah.
Did you have any comments about what has been said so far? I mean, does it make sense, or you disagree, or I mean, this is.
Yeah, well, I was struggling with where the tension is, and I think we get back to some of the issues between what is established in the modeling language and what happens when you take this through to implementation. So I hear some of the tension about what are the expectations.
That's certainly a valid question to ask.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I heard an earlier comment about the scoring system, but I don't know if that's still on the table or not.
Well, I still come to you trying to analyze the model and give it in one macro sense a pass fail. And when it fails, you show out all the different violations and why. mean, just even the first one, right? Forget Java for a second. If you can say the model has a session ID, okay, the session ID has to have at least a certain length. That seems like a pretty easy check. I just don't know how easy it is to go find in a model a object of session. But if the model can say this type of object is the session ID, we can certainly enforce it must be X digits long to be unique enough. You know, it's like saying the same thing. Your password's got to be at least this many letters. It's a little harder to say it's got uppercase, lowercase, and all those other pieces. But you can certainly say password's got to be more than 4 characters, or 8 characters, or 16 characters.
And that was
But
the
it's hard to
question.
tell which string in the model is the password.
Yeah, and that was the question, whether, you know, that's the reason why I wanted to talk to the language folks a little bit about, well, what would be the right approach? Should we extend the language with security elements in it, like these critical elements, you know, password, and, you know, there's probably a dozen or 2 dozen of them, you know, that you could types, and you're looking for a specific set of stuff if it's described as that type. And you have a specific set of values you have to provide for that type. Do we do that as an extension because it's a security extension, or do we try to put it in the modeling language itself? And I got to tell you, this ain't going away. I mean,
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. Maybe Bill, Bob, you might know the answer to this. Is there a password object in any language that's actually native to the language? I've had plenty of code where we had a session class, a password class,
I don't think
user
so.
ID class. We always wrote it up from strings and numbers and encryption algorithms.
Well, surely there are things like reusable password or password system objects, and that's the level at which you normally want to be dealing in something like a modeling language. You want to deal with modular object standards and the like.
No, but that's what I'm saying. That
that's what I
language
was thinking about, Bill.
for you, that's a password, right? I mean, the same thing. Like this first one, I have to have the model declare this thing is a session, not a string, not a date, not a number, not a not a data element, but it's an actual session in order for me to enforce that kind of rule.
And so that goes back to my whole point is a data element comes in. If it doesn't have a type set for it, you can decide whether you want to allow a default type of string, or you can say it must be identified what type it is. All right. And oh, by the way, if it becomes a specific type of data, and then the sensitivity level of that data is associated as well, because you could have passwords that are, just one-time passwords. You don't have to protect them from that point forward or something like that. Or you could have something that needs to be protected because it's used a lot, or it's, it's a key or something like that. It's really important. Those kinds of things may have different protection mechanisms, and they have different confidentiality levels or different integrity levels that have to be associated with them. So the question becomes, do we expand the language to identify those things, are the values behind them, or do you do extensions? Because SysML2O is going to have the extensions capability because of domains. And is this really a domain? Because domains were really, I think, decided, the domain concept was, business, kind of like automotive or aerospace or those kinds. And cyber, I didn't know whether you could merge multiple domains because I didn't talk to the guys about that. But I did get indoctrinated quite a bit in what they're doing when I attended the session, I guess it was last week on OMG. Back over you, Bill Curtis, because I've said my piece. I've made my point. Everybody was judiciously giving me time to air my thoughts, and I appreciate that from everyone. I don't have any further.
Oh. I'm not sure. I don't know if we had lost Bill. I tried pinging him. I see that he's on, but I'm not sure if he has a connection. He's been quiet. He's not muted, at least that I can see, and I wasn't able to get him, so I'm not sure. Maybe sometimes out in Texas he gets connection issues. Oh, he's trying to talk.
Yeah, can we discuss row 5 real quick, Paul and Bob? Because that one might be a simpler sample, right? Like you have an object that's a file. Pretty much every programming language has that. I would think there are plenty of model languages with a file object in the model language. You're basically checking if the file name has been input cleansed or the file name doesn't have the actual text HTTP in it. But that may be a more simpler one to understand. Any thoughts there? Because again, that may be more of a simpler example than a session or a password, because a file is usually a unique type of an object, almost every language.
So this was a validation problem, okay, that, it's an unintended resource, resolves to an unintended resource. So, yeah, it's difficult to analyze, but if a system environment was defined as to what the external resources that are available are the valid ones, then you could actually verify that, the verification routine would validate against that, right? So in the model, it would say, hey, you're going to go to the validation routine to verify that this is going to an approved source.
Okay, so you actually have both row 4 and row 5, right? A, does the validation routine exist? And then B, for this particular one, it's actually making sure you're in an approved list for the model.
Right. And everything's going whitelist going forward. There will be no more this, let everything come in. If it ain't blacklisted, it's okay. Everything's going to be whitelisted going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. That actually does row 4 and 5 on a file object, which again, most modeling language are going to have as an object type.
Yeah, what the model should capture is that is there a validation routine for this kind of resource access? Because typically we have when we look at this one from the static code analysis perspective, we kept the fact that one measurement parameter is the list of validation routines, and then you make sure that every access to a file resource goes through this validation routine. We don't know if the validation routine is good or bad or efficient or whatever, but we say that you must go through it, and the validation routines is an input from the measurement. So here
Right.
the model could help by identifying these routines.
Right. And the assurance case, though, would provide how is this going to be tested, right? To say that the validation routine is good. That insurance case would be unapproved because assurance cases, unless it's a standardized one, In other words, if it's a created, now that's one thing I didn't think about. If you're picking a standardized assurance case for a particular data element, then you would just say that's good. But if you had to create a custom one, then that means it has to be manually validated that that insurance case would be acceptable. And then obviously, if you, and for that type of data, well, if that insurance case was good, then you could reuse that insurance case throughout the model. So you'd only have to validate it one time that the insurance case that you're using is good. And then, of course, during your testing, you would be using the same one for all of those data elements. If they were inputs or, you know, you know, outputs.
Yeah. I mean, again, I feel like you got the simplest answer, right? Is this that we run the model through just that one rule, right? Does every data element that comes in from the outside go through a validation routine? That seems like something the model should be able to tell you yes or no on.
Yeah, and that was that was basically one of my examples in my email, Paul. I didn't send the email to everybody because I didn't want to stir everybody up without having a conversation about it first, right? But I did send it to Bill. I think, Bob, you may have got the first version of it, but y'all have heard essentially everything I wrote.
Yeah, no, I mean, what you're describing makes sense. I mean, I come to, if the model has that element, you should be able to enforce that that element has certain attributes.
But as long as
my point is, if the model doesn't have the element, it doesn't have the element, right? Again, my program has no files, so my program has no database. But if I have files, you should be able to enforce the fact that I have validation routines on the parameters for those files, or whitelist data set for row 5 and row 6, right? You could argue that you fix that problem by forcing it to a choice list, not a string.
Absolutely. And you know, I was taking it one step further and saying, hey, if the validation routine that you are using is an approved standard validation approach, assurance case solution, then it calls it good. If it's one that is, you've actually had to enumerate what it's going to look like with because the validation, there's no standard one, then it won't fail the model, but what it will say, hey, there's a warning here, you need to look at this and see if this is going to be sufficient. And then once you sign off on that, now it's approved, right? And so everywhere else you use it in the model, it would be approved, and all of those warnings would go away.
So should we go through your comment list on the spreadsheet?
That was my, I think we kind of lost you when I made a point about that. I said, I am good with whatever way you want to go forward with this. We got, 54 minutes of set aside time here. I will stay with you the whole 54 minutes, but, or longer if necessary, but I was trying to be respectful of people's time, because a lot of what I did was say, hey, we got to think about this. And then my email explained why we need to think about this, because it may need language extension, system L2O or whatever. So a lot of the ones, because I realized that most of this goes back to the thing that Bob talked about, re-emphasize that I said, is if you don't have the data there in the model, you can't do anything. related to data elements. And most of these were related to data elements or some kind of, data validation.
Yeah.
I will tell you this, the really interesting ones were when you have error message routines and data gets exposed in the error message routines, or those are kind of tough, right? Because you got to generate the error message and see if, sensitive data ends up in an error message, or a server error occurs and sensitive data ends up in there, or dump files get, recorded in places. Well, guess what? You can still model that the system's environment needs to be residing in this kind of protected world, right? For all of that and sundry stuff that can flow out to something where it's going to be recorded. What is the requirement for because a lot of times we know what happens. It goes right to root or it goes into some unprotected directory.
Bob, where are they on SysML 2.0? Or is that?
I explained that. Here's where they are. 3 months from now, they're going to publish the draft.
Right.
About 18 months, they are expecting to have it finalized.
Well, I'm saying, is it going into the open 3-month review period at OMG, or?
The draft's going out to everybody. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So
Bill,
we could
might
make those comments.
Get like Sandy Friedenthal on the OMG side. Maybe we could have a separate call with him.
Yeah.
On this.
I think we should tell them what we're trying to achieve, and they may tell, oh, we got all these nice new language features out there that are going to address all but this one thing that you need. We need to add that in. I mean, the stuff I saw during the DSIG session, they're pretty far along. And I asked the question, I asked the question, how far were they? And Sandy, I believe, indicated he felt it was about 60% done with the definition. And the rest of it was going to go pretty fast.
Okay, so we should set up a call with at least Sandy and
anyone he wants to include.
Exactly. Yeah.
I can help set that up. Yeah.
Okay.
And then Paul wanted to walk through some more examples here. So I think that line 34, number 214, invocation of a process using visible sensitive information is invoked with that's a good example to talk about. Well, how would you do that, from a model point of view? Well, guess what? You're using a command line process. That process should be enumerated. That's what you're using, and it is not. It requires sensitive data. It requires data that could be sensitive. Okay, and the command lines, and therefore, maybe you want to say you can't use it. I don't know.
Well,
In your model.
I mean, to me, that's an input, right? If I'm taking an input and I'm taking a sensitive field, maybe I have to take an encrypted sensitive field, not a visible sensible field. Or I got to say, again, that comes back to the type of field. Like, you don't know it's an SSN. You don't know it's a missile part number. You know what I mean? You just know it's a parameter. I can say the parameter should be sensitive or should be encrypted sensitive. Like, I can say what type of parameter I want, what level of security I want on it. But if the person labels it wrong in the model, it's still a valid model, right?
That's right.
Yep, Capital One encrypted all the SSNs in the cloud and forgot all the other PII. You know, so again, I don't know how you could even check for that, because that's actually saying. So go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
Again, unless it's identified as a sensitive data enumeration down further, that data, when it's passed it out, that was the reason why the example that I was trying, when a data element is going out, that the sensitivity level of that data needs to be identified, and the target process, wherever it's going to, has to have its protection level capability identified. Then you could say it's a mismatch or not.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was thinking of it on the way in, not on the way out.
Yes, the out is the problem in this case. That was the example. It's the outbound ones. You know, it was 212, 14, and 19. All of those is saying, hey, well, wait a second. Before we send this out, what is going to happen?
Right. Well, I mean, if you have a sensitive field, 214, you shouldn't be able to send it out in a non-sensitive level.
That's right.
So, I mean, again, that's probably pretty easy to check in the model. I have a variable, an element of this type got copied and pasted and used, and all the others. You got to check the daisy chain of all the places it's been transformed into are all at least as sensitive.
That's right. That was the point I was making.
Yeah, that's a very good example. That seems like something very easy to check.
Felipe Emmanuel, can we write up the detection case for this, or the detection pattern?
Here it's about the model itself. So that's, we have to get in touch with the modeling tool, people, or SysML, or the modeling language. It's not the source code here we are talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and tools don't matter. It's the SysML language. It's the language, because the tools, all they do is they record the SysML content in the language and draw pictures on a screen, diagram.
Yeah.
And then they'll have little analytic internal in the tool to say, oh, well, you drew this block and you drew this over here, but that's not compliant with the SysML language, right? That's what they do. And then people develop templates around the language to, shall we say, box modelers in so that they're only using certain things in the language.
And also to the point that we should keep separate in our mind the fact that what we should have in the model to be able to do a good job afterwards, and then the ability to use this information right now and today to do a better job. Because typically for here about the follow-up of sensitive data in or out, basically it's kind of a data flow technology you have to implement and be sure that, for instance, if there is a sensitive field in the database, you have to track down all its used from everywhere and be sure that it's compliant with the sensitivity level you've set, or the reverse. If you have an entry, an API with some identification of some fields with some sensitivity associated to that, then you have to follow up in the other direction. So in terms of technology to do that, data flow with the new languages, the new framework and so on, it's not that simple. But that shouldn't prevent us from asking that in the model you start saving this kind of information. Otherwise, otherwise it will never happen if we don't start. Then the tools won't, at least the static analyzer tool won't invest in this because there is never the right information. That's another example of information that's missing far too often, at least in the commercial world, is the architecture, the basic overall architecture with a flow of information. As an example, we have a module called Architecture Checker, which feeds on the theoretical model and then checks that it's implemented as planned. But far too often, companies and organizations just don't have this model, this architecture model. So it's difficult to implement. So it's a module we have, but it's not leveraged at its full potential because it's 80 or 90% of the time it's missing the right information from the model because it's not there. So we may have made much more evolutions and progress with this module if it was more widely usable. So if with this standard we push to have more information, then also I think at the end of the spectrum, the static analyzer tool will also evolve because they know that it will be useful. They know that in the near future, you should have the sensitivity of all data attached to the data. So then it's worth investing in this area to do better detection. But for all standards today, I believe we can still push for that, even if it's perhaps too early for static tool analysis or other solutions that have done the stream.
I'll do whatever you want. Like I said, I will support you throughout this. So, Bill, what do you want to scroll through some more of these? Paul, what do you want to do? Does anybody else want to do some more examples?
Well, I mean, the question is, what are we going to need in this to create the measure? I mean, what are we going to need to fill in for each one of these to say this is what we would be looking for to determine whether you've got a violation or not?
So what I was thinking was that each one of these are associated with a data type.
Exactly.
Okay? And it's either an inbound or an outbound, okay? And then there are levels of sensitivity associated with that inbound, outbound. So you need to know the sensitivity level, whether it is an inbound or outbound, and what you need to do with it. So there's a set of properties associated with each one of these data elements that the CWE is associated with. Once you have that, you can say, that CWE is, this data element is matches in that, those parameters, whatever they are, match this CWE. That means that the tool, when you are validating these, and you're going to find there's a whole bunch of CWEs that apply to the same combination of properties. So if we could bend these into those combinations and the variants, I got to believe it would be helpful.
Right, so in essence, that's what we need to list for each one of these.
Right, but does SysML even actually give you a sensitivity or security level attribute on a data element?
Well, that's the whole point of 2.0 is you can expand do extensions to it any way you want. But Paul, you asked a very valid question that I'm not sure anyone on the phone can answer that question. It would take someone like, Sandy or Michael, who's not here today. I don't know what the knowledge of folks are on SysML. That's the reason why I'm taking I'm actually going through and taking the classes that we've got internally in Northrop Grumman to learn something. Maybe I can, you know, ask the right questions of our SysML people. But again, it's only the part of the language you use, right?
Right. So let's assume that's just no real quick, right? You go back to row 4. The model should be able to tell me something's coming in. I can trace it through the model and see if I send it out without ever actually validating it.
There is an external input and an external output designation in an element inside a model. Those are they've been around forever.
Right.
First levels of smell.
Right. So let's think about row 4, right? So again, just that one simple rule. I've got a data element that came in from an external source, and I sent it out as an external output, and I never did anything with it. That seems like a pretty simple example to try to create.
And it may be valid that you didn't need to do anything because you're just passing the data as is.
But that violates CWE number 20, but that violates CWE 20, which is you have to validate the data. It could be a very poor validation program, but it's got to do something.
Or you should say that you bypass it on purpose.
The control flow, can affect the control flow. And so if you're just passing it through and unless you're given a trust level on the outbound, in other words, the trust in and the trust out are identical. That's the reason why I believe on external outputs, you have to define what the trust level is going to be there, as well as on the input side.
And
if you
also,
that's a problem, right?
And something we see with the microservices is that you may want to waive the need for validation, but at least the model has to say it. Because typically when you enter a service, you should identify yourself, you should authenticate yourself, you should check authorization, then you should perhaps validate the input, and so on and so on. And in some case, it's non-applicable. But what we would need to know is that the model said it's non-applicable because of trust in, trust out, or whatever. Or the model says you can waive this aspect. It's not the code to decide. It's not the measure, the static analyzer to decide. But to do a good job, it should be able to find this information. So validation could be bypassed or waived. As for identification, as for authorization. In some cases, depending on the intended architecture, the intended deployment, and so on, it could be waived. But it has to be said somewhere. It's not even a weak validation. It's somewhere saying that it's okay to not validate it. It's okay to not authenticate. And I'm fine with that, as long as it's your decision. Oh, the decision of the model, yeah, of the modeler.
Yeah, and that's explicitly said in the model, so that it's there under version control.
Yep.
Who said
Yep.
that scenario?
Are we at a point where we can go and state in each one of these what we expect to see for each one of these CWEs?
I'd have to do another.
We would need to.
I think we can bend them together and say it's, a set of groupings, get them down into, which one type we think it is versus an input or an output, or, whether it's got to have a sensitivity level, identified for, that kind of stuff. I don't know how much further beyond that we could go, Bill.
Well, if we get to that point, go ahead.
No, that's why I was looking for that one sample. There's 300 rows
Yeah,
here that we've
yeah.
got stuff. There's the one needle in the haystack that's easy to explain to everybody.
The question is what, I guess, if the bodies of information we're looking for, and we take it as far as we can, so that
Is he breaking up for everyone else?
Yeah, he is, and unfortunately, typical cell phone problem.
point where we can define these things to a level we've got something we can move forward with.
Bill, I'd be willing to go through and pick, say, 20 or 30 of them and provide everyone with a concept, a way to bend these things and what we need to have for them to be detectable in a model as being fulfilled, and what the basic ground rule.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm having some connection problems on the internet. I was getting broken responses. Go ahead. You were willing to go through and do what?
Yeah.
Paul, can you say it again?
You said you.
I would be glad. I would be glad to take, and go through and see if I could, take 30 of these or whatever it is, some good ones. See if I can at least create a couple of the bins and maybe figure out what I think all the bins are that they would be bent into. And it'll take me a couple weeks to do that, working on it. I'll be glad to do that, but I didn't want to do it before we had this conversation today, because
Fair enough.
didn't know whether people would be on the same page as I was about how you think about this problem.
Is anybody not on this page? I mean, is there anybody on the call that would disagree with this approach or would have an alternate approach?
No.
This is Mike. I don't disagree, but I'm questioning, are we assuming that SysML is the only language that modelers would use?
That's the standard, generally speaking. I mean, because UML is an extension to it.
Yeah,
Right.
but I'm talking about the open group has offered up Archimate as as an alternative to SysML. I just don't want to pigeonhole ourselves in case somebody jumps ahead and there's another language out there.
So I agree that. So I don't know anything about that the open groups language. It would be worth a conversation with them. Most definitely. And so the question becomes is, who do we have as a contact over there to talk to about this?
I used to have a contact over there, but I think he's retired, so I'll have to search.
Okay.
Archimate is miles behind SysML right now. And so I would say, let's keep riding the SysML horse. And once we have our findings of what a model should be like and what kinds of attributes should be in the language, we can share that with the open group.
That's right. You got it. And so you're making an excellent point. I wanted to keep this generic, Michael, as much as I could about bending things into types and sensitivities and things like that. And I don't know whether I got the right properties at a high enough level or not, because I'm trying to stay as high as I can, and hopefully we can actually get those as System L2O language elements, right? That people would say, yeah, those should be in the language. That's what I was trying to do.
Well, and I agree with that. We should put the requirement down as to what should be in the language. And then we go to the SysML group and we go to the Archimate group maybe, and if we find another group, that's fine. And tell them what our requirements are to be able to improve the quality of these models. And that probably is I think the best approach at this point, and not think of SysML only.
This is Bill Nichols. We've been doing a lot of modeling. We're working with a lot of modeling at SCI. And what I see are hybrid models that are using things like SysML along with tools like AADL. Now, AADL doesn't necessarily handle all of the issues that we're seeing in the security, but it has a lot of constructs that allow you to do more behavior and performance types of analyses. So you see a lot of the tools that are being used actually amount to a combination of modeling languages and not just the SysML.
Right, William, that was the third language. I couldn't think of it earlier. ADL is the other language. There are 3 languages out there, and they're used at different pockets around the world.
Yes, and again, AADL has some extensions to deal with the security that the CWE is particularly aimed at, but it's really designed as an architectural modeling language that gets into more of the architecturally specific properties than you get out of AADL. It was actually designed thinking ahead to a lot of the ilities. Thinking about things like doing performance and latency types of analyses, and those have been extended to some other security types of features as well.
See, these are all valid points to be made, and there's stuff that's in System L2O that's coming that, I mean, they're actually going to be able to take PHP and look at that and use that as, you can write PHP as part of it, and it'll interpret and understand what you're trying to do. So I would expect that these kinds of extensions to where you could actually take AADL content and integrate it with SysML, I wouldn't put that past happening.
So would an approach here be that, Paul, you charge forward on doing what you just suggested over the next several weeks? And when
I'll do it for, as many as I can, but probably not more than, a third of this list.
Well, and then we can compare that with what we would, maybe William can have that compared to AADL at SCI.
Right.
Bob, is Ben Coloni, he's tied into the open group pretty deeply, I think. And I wonder if he's involved in their language work, their modeling language work. Do you know? Bob? Did Bob drop?
And Bill, there's
No, he's
another person at OMG.
Sorry. What'd you say?
I had a question because we were looking at these other modeling languages, and I remember Ben Coloni, I believe, is pretty involved in the open group, and I'm wondering if he's involved in their work on modeling languages.
Now Ben's retired.
Okay, so he's not active then. Okay, all right.
I was going to say, I might be able to track down a connection. There's a couple people at OMG.
Sandy would probably know. Yeah.
Yeah, Sandy too. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, does it make sense? Pardon me. Does it make sense for Paul to charge forward and then to take what he produces and look at that in terms of some of these other languages and what we would be able to get from them, or what they would need to be able to do or have to detect the same pieces of information? Does that make sense?
I wouldn't have the knowledge to know about those other languages, whether, and I don't know what domains they're associated with primarily, like, what business domains and things. So I'd have to understand, the implications.
Well, we've got Bill Nichols from the SCI on the phone or on the call, and Bill, you're involved at least peripherally in the AADL work, right?
That's right. And AADL is really aimed at embedded systems. It came out of automotive. It's being used extensively in aeronautics.
So we could compare what Paul's coming up with SysML with what would work in a AADL environment.
Yes, or a hybrid. As I said,
Yeah.
a lot of our contractors are using a hybrid. They're using SysML at one level and using AADL at another. It's all architectural.
Okay.
And I think the real question is are these questions appropriate for answering at a modeling level? Not do the languages support these right now, but are these the appropriate concerns to be expressing at the early stages architecturally? That is, you might want to be able to express the capability in the language, and then that will provide certain constraints in the implementation.
Yeah.
But is this something that if you don't have these things specified in the requirements and they can't be represented in the model, it becomes much harder to trace them through to the design and build?
So that leads us to ask the question about an analysis of the model that tells us something about weaknesses in the requirements.
Well, it may tell you something about weaknesses and requirements, but what I was really suggesting is that it should tell you from the requirements, what are you going to need to do to build to satisfy those requirements? Can you constrain the later design and construction at a modeling level so that you can check your designs and your implementation against the architectural specification?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just going to be doing a dump going back to the Word. If you want to be able to do this electronically, you have to be able to express it in some sort of formalized modeling language. Not a trivial problem.
No, it's not.
But as these systems are getting big, the real push for this is as the systems get to a certain scale, they're simply beyond the ability of humans to do that kind of traceability.
That's correct. That's the whole point of all this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not that we don't want to do it, it's that it's simply beyond human capacity. And databases went way beyond human capacity years ago. Other artifacts are getting there now. They won't be able to build the next generation of airlines without this.
So what's the best way to approach this? Paul moves forward on his work. Should we have something parallel with AADL, or when Paul finishes, we see how this implies, what this implies?
From what I understand, what Paul will do is not related to SysML. It's about what needs to be captured to help measure CWE in the end. So, in my opinion, Paul's work is kind of model agnostic. It's about we need to capture this information, this attribute, this attribute, this attribute. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but you will not write it as SysML notation. You will use higher level concept, as you said earlier. And then I think with this listing, we should get in contact with the players from the modeling language themselves, the three main we've talked about, and perhaps also the players in terms of modelers. Because when we did this kind of work for the static analysis part, we had different players and different stakeholders. Here we are kind of, except from Michael, who couldn't join tonight from ZAIC, we have kind of no one in front of us.
So we should get some.
So we are just pushing. We need this. We need this. We like this. We like. We have a Christmas list, but there's no one in front of us to tell us how far it could be. Is it achievable? Is it so to have contact with the modeling language teams, so SysML and AADL and so on, to know if it's one extension away or if it's 10 years of extension away. And then also for tools, because if it cannot be implemented by tools within a reasonable time frame, it's also a problem. So that doesn't mean we shouldn't push, but that means that we have to take it into account. So here Paul will kind of create a wish list, but there should be some players from the other side to push back, to discuss. So we need this contact, and I don't know.
Yeah, Tracy, we should go check with the contacts that David made with No Magic and Spark and maybe some others about what they're actually able to do. If we can find those contacts.
Hey, they can do anything in the construct of the SysML language today, okay, in UML, depending on what,
Yeah.
The question becomes is, okay, if we start asking for this data in the SysML language, who's going to write the analyzers to actually look at, right? That could be anyone. It's not just limited to those few vendors. But I believe they could do it as well, and I think it makes sense for them to do it because I think there's such a large market for it. Okay, and oh, by the way, we've just been talking about CWEs here. What we haven't talked about is all the 853 controls and all that stuff, right? And that's another whole world, right? And those are those are elements in implementation of a system, not so much in the design. And when you're talking about operational, that's a different part of the model of the operationalization of a system. It's all a logistics thing almost.
What should we do?
That's beyond the scope of what we're trying to do right now. Okay.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah.
What do we do about that?
Yeah. I just wanted to point out that there's many more of these, and this is, you know,
So let's get this done, and we can consider how we address that later, or whether we address it.
well, yeah, and oh, by the way, everybody was, if we can just get some traction here with the community on it, there'll be someone else that'll stand up and say, well, we'll take care of the 853. We know exactly how to do it.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can get the government to do that. They'll pay someone to do that.
Okay. So is our way forward here? One, you'll do this, at least begin this analysis. And then once we get enough, we can work with some of the language folks to see what they're able to actually do, what capabilities they have for representing that information.
I think that's a reasonable path forward. I got 2 senior security engineers that are building tools for models right now that are related to the 853 controls. I think that they could quickly say, because I use the CIA concept because that's well known. Okay, it's a U.S. standard, but okay, of the way you have to do it from an RMF perspective. I think we ride that until someone tells us don't, and then we need to enhance it. It needs to be more than just, competence, integrity, and availability. What the level is, because there's different levels, right? But you're going to have levels associated with at the data element level for those 3, and maybe there's other ones, but it seems like CIA covers the gamut.
Paul, is that something that's known outside the military intelligence community?
CIA is that's not a military thing. That is a NIST thing.
Well, okay, but it's primarily a government standard at this point, or set of controls at this point.
Well, the National Institute of Standards and Technology is designed to be for commercial and everybody, right?
No, right.
Yeah,
But that doesn't mean that everybody knows it.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more commercial. Sorry, we're seeing it more and more in the commercial space.
Okay.
So it is growing.
Okay. Well, if we've got a path forward, the next step then, I guess, is, Paul, if you want to charge forward, and if anybody wants to volunteer to work with you or help you, that would be good.
All help is welcome. I would like once I put the structure together, the additional columns I'm going to add probably right after C. I'm going to create some CIA 3 fields, 3 rows, 3 columns, or something about that. The CIA has to be there, that you got to have these value elements, some column there that says what elements you have. And once I get the templates for those, like a half a dozen of them, I'd like some feedback on it.
Okay.
Before I start going through and ranking them all.
Okay.
And oh, by the way, when I rank them, it's just based on my world, right? How I think about the integrity of systems in general. And so I like Philippe Emanuel says, I'm not thinking about this from a language point of view. I'm saying, if I had the descriptors of a system, what would I need to say that system is good?
So once you get a set of these, we can certainly circulate it around to the group. for comment and feedback.
With Sandy Friedenthal, do you guys want to chat with him sooner rather than later, or do you want to share what Paul puts together?
Maybe let my guess is let Paul start, and not the whole thing, but a subset, and then talk to Sandy with it, because then we'll have something concrete. Does that make sense, Paul?
We need at least a slide on what the structure is going to look like to get his comments back. And then I need to go look at the 2.0, because I don't have there are published drafts right now you can get to. They're interim things, I think, available, but the official published draft for comment is in 3 months. So there's a lot to look at right now. I just haven't looked at it, and I don't know what's there related to security. And we can certainly talk to Sandy and say, hey, can you point us to what you already have for security, so that maybe this is, almost a non-conversation, right? We just need to use what they got.
Yeah.
Okay.
I could, yeah, ping him about that. I'll copy you guys. That makes sense. Yeah. Making a note. Yeah.
What do you think? Get him within the next couple of weeks, Paul?
Yeah, I'm available.
Okay.
I'm gonna be working on this unless I get some other assignment. Because right now, the government's not releasing any RFPs, so I'm not working on any procurements. I'm mostly painting my house inside.
Okay.
I already put 23 gallons of paint on the walls, and I got about.
I'm saying, I hope you got the windows open.
Yeah.
Yeah, the wife opens the windows up because she's afraid the bunny's going to fall over from, but they're surviving. Acrylic paint's not that bad. So.
Okay. Yeah. Tracy,
Yeah,
see what you can set up.
Give me a week, at least a week before we talk to Sandy. Okay. Just to have a conversation and include anybody else that wants to be on that call just to hear what he says.
Yeah. Say maybe the week after next would give us.
Yeah, week after next.
And then we can reset the next meeting for the whole group once we come out of that and see where we are and see what we need to do.
Yeah, and for the whole group, unless y'all object, I'm going to probably include you on all just any emails that I send out on, unless it's just something where I'm doing a short exchange about a question or something. But anything that, conceptually how I'm looking at this, asking questions to get feedback from everybody as I'm going along here. And there'll probably be not any more often than every 3 days, okay, or so along the way, so that I can at least hear from you. And I'm pretty good about writing exactly what I'm thinking. I don't use too many.
Sounds good to me, Paul.
I think it's actually, yeah. Yeah, that way we keep the group moving. Okay. We've only got 5 minutes left of the scheduled time. Anything else that anybody wants to raise? All right. Well, it sounds like we've got a path forward. So unless there's any other comments, suggestions, we can call the meeting.
You're welcome to look at what I've already done, the comments that I've made, but I can tell you a lot of them were in that, well, we need to talk to the folks in System L2O. Maybe we can do this. And I'm kind of like, after talking through today, I think we can do most of these.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll set up the call for Sandy in a little over a week, and then from there decide when it's time for the next group meeting. Thank you
And
much.
also,
Go
Bill,
ahead,
I would like to get all of the 1,000 above or greater than 743s. I'd like to get that list
Okay.
because I didn't, they are in a different category, and I want to take a look at those and make sure whatever I come up with could apply to those too. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, Tracy, we can, I guess, pull those off of the website or off of the SharePoint.
Sorry, I was confused about that. So we have this 223. You're talking about another.
Well, there were the CWEs that were above 1,000. I mean, 1,044, 1,048, 1,062. So they're the CWE numbers that were, and these were mostly, I think, the things that Bob had added from. What?
Oh, I see. In the other tab on the SharePoint.
Yeah, Paul, you're talking about the CWEs numbered above 1,000, right?
Well, I didn't know whether it was any between 743 and 1,000, but yeah, the ones.
Oh yeah,
great.
there's some 900s and yeah, okay.
Yeah, anything above 743 or whatever the number was, the last one.
Okay.
I want to look at them just to see. Okay.
Well, let's pull those down, Tracy. See if we can pull this off SharePoint and shoot it to Paul.
Okay. I think I get what you're saying. Yep.
He just needs to see what those CWEs are that are above CWE 743.
I just want to look at them, see what they look like.
Yeah. I mean, they are there on SharePoint, but we can get you.
You're talking about the CWE identifier, the number, right? Sorry to be done.
Yeah, the CWE numbers that are greater than, I think it was 743 was the last one in the 1008 list.
Okay, because this spreadsheet that you updated.
Spreadsheet, I don't care. It's just I didn't see that list, so I don't know what they look like.
We want to make sure he's got a complete list. So go ahead and send me the one that's on SharePoint. The VIN.
Okay, because we have ours that 223 that goes up to 943, CWE 943.
Right.
But then I noticed that
743. I think it goes to 743.
Yeah, and then Vinarchik has one that looks like about 20 CWEs that are higher, that have higher numbers, and they're into the thousands. CW 1245, for instance, improper finite state machines in hardware logic. So there's some in there that we ought to get
right,
to Paul so we can see what to do about them.
I noticed that 943 is not in this list, and I don't know why.
Well, I wondered what he did, because this is one that Michael.
This is his own tab. Yeah.
Yeah, and he may have deleted some and added others. I'm not sure.
Could have. All right. Well, I'll do a match to see.
Yeah.
I'll try to do some kind of match. All right.
Okay.
What I'll do, Paul, is I'll add a second tab to the spreadsheet that you updated, and I'll put Michael's CWEs on the other tab just so you can.
All right, good. I understand what this list is now. It's Michael's list. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and we'll get back in touch as soon as we make some more progress.
All righty.
Okay.
Okay.
Happy holidays,
everyone.
Bill.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.